Welcome to The Application, the podcast series from Side Business School, featuring some of the extraordinary personalities who were offered a place on the Executive MBA here at Oxford University. I'm Kathy Harvey. As Associate Dean, I've been involved with the people who've embarked on this journey for over half the 20 years since the programme was established. This is my chance to reconnect with them and to hear more about their struggles and their achievements, personal and professional, and to learn the leadership lessons we can all take from these inspiring alumni.
It still is difficult to get out of bed. I will admit I've never been a morning person, but I still do think that quality is key. That actually the driver that drove me in rowing still drives me in business.
I'm joined today by Tim Foster MBE. Tim has been described as one of the finest rowers Britain ever produced, winning the Olympic gold medal at the Sydney Olympics in 2000 in the coxless 4, alongside Steve Redgrave, Matthew Pinsent and James Cracknell. That success came on the heels of bronze in the earlier Atlanta Olympics and 7 medals in the World Championships. So before he studied, he had already achieved a huge amount. After retiring, he became the Swiss national rowing coach, and now he's head of performance for the UK Football League Managers Association, alongside being a leadership coach. Somewhere in between, he studied for his executive MBA at Oxford, and how he did it, I'm not quite sure. So, Tim, winning gold at the Olympics, it's an achievement most of us can only ever dream of. So how did your identity as a rower, how did that journey towards that identity begin?
That's a really good question, because I would always have described myself as a rower, but other things as well. And I think the main time was when I left school. And actually, I was really lucky. I had supportive parents who, when I came home and said, I'm going to take up this job as a rower, which is amateur, it's unpaid, it's a journey where we don't quite know where we're going to get to, albeit we have these dreams. It was probably then that actually, my rowing journey really started. And actually that helped define me through late teens, my 20s, and actually until I was 30, when actually I retired as a rower and stayed as a rowing coach, albeit so therefore in the same world. But it was probably way back when I was 18 and leaving school that I probably first defined myself as a rower.
You've always said that you were a collaborative person. You're the sort of person who wants to be a team member. And of course, rowing is a team sport, but it's also incredibly competitive. There is that dilemma between competing and collaborating. What drives you most, do you think?
It's a really good question, because for me, I do fuel myself with collaboration. And actually, I love being part of team. And actually, I would admit that for me, there's not an ego in that. Actually, I'd much rather be the smallest member of a winning team than the largest person of a team that ultimately is unsuccessful. Actually, it's very much about that collaboration, except sometimes that does mean competition. And actually, if I use the example of the Sydney 4, you've got 4 very elite individuals who are very, very good at what they do, amongst the best in the world. And therefore, we've got egos that are involved. We've got people who are competing for space and actually competing about how we should do things as well as what we do. And to me, getting that balance right was a really important sort of aspect of teamwork. It wasn't just about getting along and collaborating and being nice to each other. Sometimes actually it was about delivering difficult messages or giving people the push that you felt that they needed. And sometimes it was actually about justifying your own place. And there's only 4 seats in that boat, and there's not a space for everybody that would like to be there.
You were a bit of a motley crew. You were all very, very different. For those people who haven't seen you and are just listening to this podcast, I think it's fair to say that although you are over 6 foot, you're not the tallest rower who ever entered the Olympics. So give me a sense of how all of you did actually reach the point where you pulled together to endure right to the very end and beat the Italians at Sydney.
To describe us physically, I've always assumed that I'm small. I am 6'3", but in a rowing world, I'm the smallest that you're going to meet, and the other three in that Sydney boat were much taller, much broader, much stronger. My strength was the technical side. I was the facilitator that could allow them to do what they were able to do otherwise, and I would set up the platform, and then they could do their fantastic things. So part of my role was that. Part of my mentality was about quality. I used to hate getting out of bed early in the mornings, and actually that was my real struggle of the day, to sort of drag myself out at the crack of dawn. And yet by the time I was at the training centre meeting the others, I thought, well, if I've made that sacrifice, I've got to make sure it's worthwhile, and this is now real quality. You had James Cracknell, who is the most driven and motivated person I've ever met, and actually that can be his positive but also his downfall, in that he'll throw himself over the cliff sort of without realising that's the danger in front of him. So part of our job again was to reel him in, allow him a bit of space and a bit of voice, but make sure he didn't sort of push himself too hard and too far. The complete opposite end of the spectrum was Matthew Pinsent, the most talented rower I've ever known in sort of 40 years of knowing the sport, and his mentality as well, don't do more than you need to do. Like, actually, enough is enough, and if you're going to win, but you don't need to win by a great distance. It's slightly tough saying that about somebody who's got 4 Olympic gold medals, but if you look at the distances he won by, it was never by more than a second. So what he was very good at was getting himself in front, and obviously Matthew was partnered with Steve Redgrave for a number of years and a number of Olympics, and Steve was incredibly motivated, incredibly driven and determined, yet had that idea of knowing what therefore needed to be done. And actually by the time I got to row with Steve, it was towards the end of his career, and he was able to actually realise that it wasn't just push. Sometimes it was about recovery, sometimes it was about actually what you didn't do as well as what you did do, and that was a really important dynamic that we all contended with within the team.
I think many people will have heard the story about Steve Redgrave, who is, of course, diabetic and had to balance his career as a rower with managing that condition. But you had your own physical adversity to deal with, and it was touch and go, really, whether you would achieve that ambition at Sydney. Tell us a little bit about how you dealt with your own issues as a rower, and how you felt that might affect your ambitions, how you overcame those issues.
Yes, I mean, Steve managing his diabetes was absolutely amazing to witness, and to be there and watch him do that. And no one had ever recovered, or no one had diabetes and achieved in a sport like rowing at that sort of level. And so it was fantastic to witness and to see. My challenges were more to do with my back. I had some serious back injuries which were brought on by rowing, probably also because I was a little bit smaller. I was having to stretch a bit more. I was having to kind of keep up with people who were otherwise sort of more physically talented than me. And ultimately that meant in the beginning of 1999, so a year and a half before the Olympics, I had to have some discs removed from my back, which again, no rower had once and recovered from. It was actually going to be the second time I was going to have discs removed. So I'd been through it once and was now going to have to put myself through it again. And yet I never lost sight of the goal I wanted to achieve. There's a documentary video series of us building up to the Olympics, and there's an interview with me, or effectively it's just a camera pointing at me as I'm in a hospital bed and I'm about to go into the operating room, and I turn to the camera and I say, well, when I win the gold medal, I'll know what I've had to go through to do it, and it'll make it worthwhile. And I guess the realization was I was going to have to pay the cost before getting the reward. But actually that drive and that ability to work the short-term goals as well as having the long-term vision was a really key factor in going through to be honest, the hell that I had to go through, the period where I couldn't walk, the period where I couldn't do normal things that normal people do. And I was lucky I got some really good treatment and some really good care. And Jürgen, who was our coach, that he was really supportive and was like, there, Tim, do normal things before you start to think superhuman things. Do normal things first. Tie your shoelaces, get yourself out of bed, or whatever it might be. But actually having that focus did really help me ultimately go through the steps that were necessary to one, get myself healthy, two, get myself fit, three, get myself back in the boat, and ultimately to win the gold medal.
So tell me about that relationship with Jürgen Grobler, your coach. He was, as many of these people are, a very unusual, very driven person. How did that relationship make the difference, and what did you learn from him?
So to describe Jürgen Grobler, he is originally from East Germany. He came over to Britain in 1990, having been a very, very successful rowing coach in East Germany, who at the time dominated world rowing. And yet he was one of the only East German coaches from any sport that then had success over in the West. And Jürgen was able to adapt himself and his coaching style to Western culture and what we expected as a coach. I mean, even the fact that I call him Jürgen rather than Herr Grobler is actually, it took Jürgen a while to kind of get used to that. But the relationship we had with him was, I think, again, a really important dynamic in the team. He wasn't somebody who shouted. He wasn't somebody who always had to have the last word or the only word. He actually was very thoughtful. He was often very quiet. He's someone actually who had never rowed himself. It was a really personal relationship. He was very good at driving us to the edge. But I would also admit that in terms of other coaches I've had and seen sort of working in rowing, Jürgen was very good at knowing where the edge was, and he never pushed you over the edge, whereas it's easy sometimes to push. But Jürgen was, I think, really good at understanding what was possible and making sure that he genuinely got the best out of you, whether that was for you personally, but also for you in your sport.
How did he deal with the emotions and the aspirations which differed between the team? I think you said to me once that when you became the Swiss rowing coach, you were watching that team play, and he said something to you which surprised you. Can you remember that?
I think by becoming the coach, I started to understand Jürgen more. I think the relationship I had with Jürgen when I was the athlete and he was the coach, I think was very good, and I really respected him. But I respect him even more having coached myself, because I started to understand the reasons why. And one of the things Jürgen did say to me was the first World Championships I'd been to as a coach, I'd got given a team and I'd taken them to the World Championships. And actually they won the World Championship. So at this point, I think I'm a pretty good coach. So I've tried one is a pretty good record. And everybody was congratulating me. And anyway, in the sort of after event and in the sort of crowds that were gathered, Jürgen sort of pushed his way through and came up to me and gave me a hug and congratulations, but Tim, anybody can do it once. And I sort of looked at him and thought that's a bit odd, and probably, I'll be honest, slightly dismissed it in the euphoria of the moment. But again, actually looking back at it, I think in that first year I'd been lucky in the athletes I had. They really responded to me. I probably had a honeymoon period in my coaching because I had been a successful rower. And therefore I tried the same tactic second year, which was partially successful. The next year it probably wasn't successful. The year after that it definitely wasn't successful. And again, I started to realize, Jürgen does know what he's talking about, because what the art of the leadership or the coaching of the team was understanding what they needed and what would actually bring out the best in them, rather than it being what I would have wanted as a leader. And I think, it was understanding there were different ways.
We talk in business about giving honest feedback, and I suppose that sports people, elite sports people, are used to getting sometimes brutal and very honest feedback. How different do you think it is giving and receiving feedback in the world of sport to the world of business?
It is. And I guess I've had the pleasure of working within sort of business for the last few years. And the way that people give and receive feedback is one of the big differences, I'd admit, between sport and business. That in the sports world, it happens daily. It probably happens within each day. That's the art of coaching, or that's the end of day debrief, or the first thing in the morning sort of goal setting of what we are due to achieve. So having set that norm, it was then okay to be critical. And actually, I'll be honest, again, one of the reasons I think we win in Sydney is the fact that we lost our last major race before the Olympics and were able to have a meeting where we were really critical about each other. And it wasn't just taking personal responsibility, it was actually being critical about each other. And that was all given and received in a way that was, well, if it makes us go faster, then it's a question and a conversation we are going to have. So for me, the businesses that I work with, or the people that I see that are successful, are able to kind of generate that culture and have that more as a norm. And so criticism doesn't just come in an annual review or a quarterly sort of meeting. It actually is ingrained in the environments. That we could talk about psychological safety, or we could talk about trust, or accountability. To me, there are a lot of elements of that that have to be normal in order to get the honesty of criticism. And again, for me, I would definitely not have been as successful in my sporting career if I wasn't able to receive feedback.
It's fascinating. So let's go back to that night before the Sydney victory. You said you were very honest and open with each other, but tell me about what happened the night before and how you thought about the race as it started.
It seems odd for a team that prided themselves in openness and kind of collaboration. It was the night before the Sydney final, and to imagine, you've got 4 very big individuals in a very small room. Olympic villages are not luxurious. And we actually talked about why. And it was the very first time we'd got beyond the what and the how and the who was going to sort of do things. And we actually talked about why, and it was incredibly powerful to hear Steve Redgrave talk for the very first time within our team about winning his 5th Olympic gold medal. He'd never talked about the 5th. He'd only ever talked about winning an event that he'd not won yet. Or Matthew talked about being a legend. I talked about righting the wrongs of 4 years previous when I'd gone to the Atlanta Olympics in a position where I could win, probably actually honestly in a position where we should have won, and we didn't win. We came 3rd. We were 0.4 of a second off winning, which is not a lot. But in Olympic,
not a lot, but everything that matters.
Exactly, like 0.4 of a second. So 80 centimetres is really the difference between winning and losing. I have an Olympic bronze medal at home, but don't ask me where. So to have the opportunity to right that wrong, and the speech and the words that I said in that meeting were, right, well, I'm in the same position I was 4 years ago, but we're now in a position where I honestly believe we will win. When we then sat on the start of the Olympic final, and you've got, I think, 35,000 people watching on the day and something like 100 million people watching live, I had the confidence in the process I was about to deliver that actually if I could do what I could do and we could do what we could do, we will win. And that sounds a little bit big-headed possibly to say it out loud, but it wasn't meant to be big-headed. It was the way that we honestly believed.
It sounds good. It still sounds good that you remember and enjoy every moment.
You can't see the smile on the podcast, but actually just the memory makes me happy.
Has anything ever been as good as that moment of glory?
In sporting terms, that is, to me, the absolute pinnacle. I mean, not just because it's the Olympics and it's a huge and wonderful event. It was the fact of the journey that I'd gone through, and it was my 3rd Olympics that I'd competed at. Having the injuries along the way were definitely moments where it made the winning all the sweeter. I'm now a dad of sort of 2 kids. I'm married since the Olympics. I got married and had 2 children, and they do compete. I mean, they keep giving at the moment. But that's a different form of pride and enjoyment. Actually, the fact that I can look back 24 years later and remember pretty much every minute of that day, almost, even rather not just the race, but it brings so many emotions. The main one of which is the pride in achieving what I could achieve, and I honestly believe it didn't have to be the Olympics. It doesn't have to be being the best in the world at something. Just the feeling of genuinely giving 100% of me was something I'm very proud of.
You've taken that pride and enjoyment and satisfaction with you, I can see, in your current career. But it isn't an easy transition. So how did you manage that change of identity? You moved on to become the national Swiss rowing coach. Then you moved on from there to do business coaching, and now to this head of performance role. I'd like to speak a bit about that in a minute. But tell me a little about the transition and how you managed it.
It is a very difficult transition for any athlete, actually, especially ones that have grown up with a dream. And I'd spent 20 years of actually my adult life being defined as a rower and then a rowing coach, which in some ways was a cop-out, I suppose, in that I didn't leave the environment. I just changed the title or changed the role that I was doing. But I'll admit it still isn't the real world. It's a niche, wonderful, but peculiar world. And it was one of the reasons I came to do the Executive MBA, because at the time I was head coach of the Swiss national rowing team. It was something I still enjoyed doing, but was something that for me wasn't everything. I didn't just want to be a rower. And what I wanted to get from the EMBA was direction, was the justification of actually, did I have other skills that could be transferred into other environments? And it was a fantastic experience to do. It for sure was my pivot moment. I'll admit it. It didn't necessarily give me direction. It gave me a broader horizon rather than being one thing that I realised I could do. I actually was quite pleased to realise there were a lot of skills that I had that actually were transferable, and I did now have this choice of things that I could do, and that's been a lovely journey to explore.
So the Executive MBA was after that experience as being the Swiss rowing coach. So really the end of your rowing life and the beginning of your new life. Now you're doing a variety of things. I sense you're very comfortable, Tim, in your own skin, and you're head of performance for a Football Managers Association. It's a very different sport. It's a very different culture. I don't know if you can tell us about some of the famous footballers and managers you're coaching, but can you say something about that difference and something about the cultural difference and what you observe in the figures you're now helping as a coach?
It is a fascinating world, and you're 100% right. It's a very, very different world. I mean, I didn't have 30,000 people telling me I'm rubbish as I walk to my office, which effectively for them is the dugout. I don't have the scrutiny. I don't live in such a volatile world as they do, in that, unfortunately, there was a manager I went to meet last Friday and unfortunately is sacked by Saturday, which happens, and I wish it didn't, but that's not something I've been able to change. But what has been really interesting is trying to help them. I can come in with an outsider's view, which I think is appreciated in football at the moment, because there are a lot of people within their environment who know football, and I know a bit about football, but that's not where my expertise is. Mine's more in the leadership and the team, and it's trying to work out what can work for them. So one of the programs I'm working on at the moment is called the Football Leaders Program. We have, I think, 3 Premier League managers on it at the moment. We have 3 WSL, so Women's Super League managers on it at the moment, plus sort of 10 other assistants and other managers who are really at the top end of their game. And it's trying to identify what's relevant for them in terms of leadership, what is actually going to help them. And it's a really exciting challenge, because one of the things we're tasked with is no English manager has ever won the Premier League. So actually, the fact that the ones I work with are not just English, they're Scottish and Welsh, but we talk about a home-produced manager actually winning the biggest league in the world, is something that, it's very different to an Olympic gold medal, but it's something that actually gives me the challenge to try and achieve.
So what would improve leadership in the world of football?
If I'm 100% honest, time. So the average tenure of a football manager at the moment is 13 months. But actually, what we are trying to do is get more education out there. And within football, you've got what I would admit are very intelligent people who don't realise they're intelligent. They probably left school at 16 because they were very good at kicking a ball, and actually have not sat in a classroom, so they're not comfortable in that environment. So one of the challenges I have is, how can I deliver some knowledge, or how can I help them to realise some of the skills that they've got, or enhance some of the skills that maybe need enhancing? How can I do that for them, without just sitting them in a lecture theatre?
I want to ask you one more question. When you applied for the Executive MBA programme at Oxford, you had to fill in an application form. I think you remember that.
I do, yes.
And one of the essays asked you to discuss a challenge which lay ahead of you. I think your previous answer goes some way towards answering this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Do you think you met that challenge? And what lies ahead now for you?
I'll be honest, not that I made it up on the spot in my application, but I can't remember exactly what I
Surely not.
said was my challenge. But to me, without trying to appear sort of big-headed, I think one of the feelings you get of having the career in sport that I had was a sense of achievement, was a sense of personal worth. And I always felt that I had more to give than just sport. And my challenge of doing the EMBA was to take that into a different environment and actually to learn and to improve and to put as much emphasis on me improving as can be measured in sport, and sometimes it's harder to measure in business, but actually could I still be as successful as I had been previously in the future? And I'll admit I don't think I'm there yet, and I definitely don't feel that I'm at the end of that journey. I think I'm on a good way to that journey, but there are more things that I would love to achieve. There are more things that I'd like to be involved with. There are more people that I would love to see be successful, and I can say that I help them along the way. So as answering part of your question, the answer is no, I'm not there yet, but interview me again in another 4 years and hopefully I'll be closer to it again.
Tim, you talked about everybody in the Coxless Four having their own motivation, their own raison d'etre for doing what they did. What was your motto?
My motto, I guess, was if I've got out of bed, let's make it good. Let's make it quality. As a team, I think our motto would have been more along the lines of don't leave things to chance, but actually, make sure you know what you need to do and do it.
It's so typical of you to think of the team motto and not just your own motto, but your motto is if you get out of bed, make it worth it. Yeah. Is that still your motto?
It still is difficult to get out of bed. I will admit I've never been a morning person, but I still do think that quality is key. That actually, I will admit that the driver that drove me in rowing still drives me in business, that actually it's about the quality of delivery, or it's the quality of thought that I can put into things. So I think it's still true, albeit luckily my alarm doesn't go off at 5:30 every morning these days. I'm getting lazy in my old age.
Tim, I'm sorry that's all we've got time for, because this has been a really inspiring discussion and conversation. I hope that you've enjoyed it. I hope that everybody listening has enjoyed it. I hope for you, Tim, it hasn't been too much of an ordeal, because I've learnt a lot. And I'm always humbled by the stories, the inspiring stories of the students who have gone through our programmes. I'll be back with another episode of The Application, so do look out for it wherever you usually get your podcasts. If you'd like to know more about Saïd Business School, take a look at the Oxford Answers section on our website, or check out the programme pages for more inspiring stories about our Executive MBA alumni. The Application is produced by Philippa Goodrich and Oxford Digital Media. I'm Kathy Harvey, Associate Dean at Saïd Business School. Thank you for listening.